Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our group learning program and we're studying chapter 19 in this book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. This chapter is titled The Difficult Human Existence, Sickness, Aging, and Death. This is where you learn a bit about the life story of the Buddha and what motivated him on this journey to get to enlightenment. So welcome to all of you guys, whether you're joining for the first time or you're joining regularly. The way that I typically start class is I do meditation with you guys and guide you in a meditation practice so you can build up your breathing mindfulness meditation and your loving kindness meditation. So today I'm going to do the same thing, which is ease us into meditation with some chanting. Then there's going to be some guidance. There'll be a period of time where it'll just be quiet and we're meditating together, and then we'll come out of the meditation with some more chanting as well. So if you'd like to join for meditation, you can pull up a cushion or a chair or whatever it is that you usually use for meditation. There's those 4 positions to meditate in: seated, lying, standing, and walking, where seated, lying, and standing tend to work really well for online learning. So I'm going to ease us into meditation with the chanting, and you're welcome to join along, and then I'll be back with some guidance to be able to help you in the meditation. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Bhutang Bhagavanhang Abhivateyami Savakhato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Bhagavato Sāvaka Saṅkho Saṅghang Namami Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Iti piso Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vicacaranang Sammuno Sakato Rokavito Anutero Purisa Dhammasati Satatawa Manusanang Bhutto Bhagavati. Okay, with the lower body and hands and arms comfortable, and the upper body erect, just close the eyes and start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Here you're just looking to establish the breath, a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. Not forced or controlled, just a gradual inhale through the nose, experiencing the full breath. And then when you're ready, exhale out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Your breath may not match up with the guidance that I provide, and that's okay. This is your practice. I'm just here for guidance. You can use this voice as a reminder that whenever you get to the next inhale, breathe in gradually through the nose, developing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. And then whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose, experiencing the full breath. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Once the breath is well established, start fixating the mind on the breath, either the sound of the breath coming into the nose or the sensation of air moving over the skin into the nose. The breath is the present moment. Fixate the mind on the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the mind fixated on the breath, whenever you notice that it moves off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. No need to observe the thought, label it, judge it, analyze it, or even try to figure out where it's coming from. Whenever you notice that the mind is moved off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. I'm going to be quiet now and let you do this work of focusing on the breath, cutting off and letting go anytime the mind moves off the breath. You have nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. No one needs you right now. This is your time to focus on the breath. Breathing in and out. วาโพตังมหาเกวันนังอภิวาเตมิสวากขาโตมหาเกวตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนมหาเกวโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสมหาเถวาอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิจาจารณังสัมมุโนสคาโตโรกาวิโตอนุเตโรปุริสานามาสติสัตตาตาวามนุสนังโพโตภาควาติ Okay, if you guys would like to slowly make your way out of meditation, I would like to once again welcome all of you guys, whether you're joining for the first time or you're joining regularly. Welcome to our class today. As I mentioned, today's class is all about understanding this difficult human existence of sickness, aging, and death. This is where you learn a bit about the life story of the Buddha and what motivated him on his journey to enlightenment. And there are certain lessons from his journey to enlightenment that you can extrapolate and help you in your journey to enlightenment. So that's why it's helpful to actually learn about his life story so that it will help you and aid you on your journey to enlightenment. The way that I've organized this talk is it's organized based on the Buddha's birth, his early life, his journey to enlightenment, and then his teaching career as well. And then ultimately we're going to be talking about sickness, aging, and death and why the mind is so discontent during this period of time. What I typically do is I pause at different times during the talk and open up for questions that you guys might have, and you're welcome to ask questions today by putting that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or by electronically raising your hand, and then you can unmute your mic and ask any and all questions that you like. I'm actually going to teach the entire life story of the Buddha first before I actually open up to questions. So normally where I open up to questions in the middle, I'm going to just open up to questions at the end so you guys can ask questions about the life story of the Buddha after learning the entire story. So Siddhartha Gotama was the individual who was born in 563 BCE. This is what some people would refer to as BC, but referring to it as BCE is a way to disconnect it from the Christian calendar and make it kind of more applicable to everybody in the world, but it's still connected to the Christian calendar. So in 563 BCE, he was born into a royal family. His mom was a queen, and he was the firstborn son, destined to become the prince. As the mom was pregnant, it was customary during this time to take her back to her homeland in order to give birth, because then when you give birth, you would have your relatives there to help you, like your mom, your sisters, your brothers, different people around would be able to help you. So they organized this caravan to take the queen back to her homeland in order to give birth there. And on her way, she went into labor pains. So they stopped the caravan, and she goes over and grabs onto a tree, and she's trying to deliver the baby out through the birthing canal. And as this is trying to progress, the baby can't come out of the birthing canal, so it breaks through the side of the stomach, and ultimately his mother ends up dying 7 days after his birth, because they didn't have the technology at that time to be able to save her life, where nowadays we would have just did a C-section and everything would have been just fine. But during this time frame, it wasn't uncommon for the mother or even the child to die during childbirth, because medical technology wasn't where it is today. So 7 days after his birth, his mother ends up passing away. And because it was not necessarily uncommon for these things to occur, they had protocols in place that if you had siblings, they would adopt your child as their own. And this is what occurred, is that Siddhartha Gautama's mother, the queen, had a older sister who adopts Siddhartha Gautama as her own child. So his aunt became his stepmother, and now she raises him as her own child. And when he was born, it said that there was a miracle that was exhibited, but I think this was probably an elaboration or embellishment on the story during his lifetime, because after they wrote things down and they went through many, many hands, I think people probably embellished the story a bit, because if this part of the story was true, it wouldn't actually need the next part, because what was said is that at his birth, he walked 7 steps and lotus flowers were blossoming under his feet, and he spoke and he said, "This will be my last birth." But I don't think this is actually true, because if that was true, the next part of the story wouldn't really be needed. Where the next part of the story is that the father summons advisors to come and let him know what his son is going to become. And he summons 108 advisors. And 107 of these advisors share with the king that his son was going to be this great monarch and this great ruler, and he was going to expand his territory far and wide. And his father really liked this. And, he's like, yeah, that's my boy. All right, wonderful. But there was this last advisor, the 108th one, who comes in and apologizes to the king and says, "Sir, I'm so sorry to share this news with you. I heard what the other advisors said, and they are 100% true. Your son is going to be a great leader, but he's not going to be a monarch in the way that you think. He's actually going to be a spiritual leader." And his father didn't like this. So just in case this person was right, he decides that he's going to take actions to try to make this not happen, that he sequesters his son into the royal palace and tries to woo him into the ways of becoming a monarch. He lavishes him with all kinds of gifts, like, the very best things that a father who was a king with royal riches could provide to his son. So he gives him, great entertainment, wonderful fabrics to wear as clothes, excellent food, beautiful women bathing him and taking care of him, all the royal riches that you can imagine that would go behind spoiling a son, essentially, and helping him to get to the point where he was not interested in doing anything else but being a monarch. And that's what the father was thinking, that he would never be able to acquire this type of life anywhere else but other than being a king. So during this period of time, Siddhartha Gautama, up to the age of 29, is living inside the palace, and he doesn't go outside the palace at all. But he's about to become the king, because during this time frame, you would become the king when you would get to the age of 30, and your father would retire. And now your father would be there to help you become a better and better king. So Siddhartha Gautama, realizing that he's 29 years old and he's going to rule over this population of people, and having never been outside the kingdom, he decides to go outside the kingdom to see what's going on there so he can understand the life of the people outside in the kingdom. And when he goes outside of the palace, he brings with him his royal attendant, like his chief of staff, essentially his main confidant. And now he goes outside the palace, and he has what we refer to as the 4 observations. These are the 4 things that motivated him towards the journey of enlightenment, that he sees a sickly person, an aging person, a dead corpse, and he sees a roaming ascetic, somebody who's looking to understand life better and get to enlightenment. And when he sees this sickly person, he sees this disgruntledness and this anger and frustration around this person. And he doesn't understand what's going on, so he needs to ask his royal attendant what's happening. And his royal attendant explains to him that this person is sick, they're ill, they're not going to be able to provide for their basic necessities to sustain life, and that person and their family was pretty disgruntled. So this was very new to Siddhartha Gautama, because he only ever lived this life of luxury in the palace, and he didn't understand this life of not having the things that he needed. So then he ends up seeing an aging person, kind of an older, decrepit person who's struggling in life. And once again, he sees this grief and this despair and this frustration. And he needs to ask his royal attendant what's going on over there. And it's essentially the same story, that this person isn't able to provide for themselves. They're getting older, and now there's this frustration and agitation. So this was new to Siddhartha Gautama, because he had everything he could imagine in the royal palace, living this luxurious life. Then he sees a dead corpse. And once again, there's misery and sorrow and grief and despair around the corpse with the family. And he needs to ask his royal attendant what's going on there. And it's essentially the same story, that, this person has died, and now they're not going to be able to provide the basic necessities that they need in order to sustain life. And, they're going to struggle and have more difficulties. So this all has a real impact on Siddhartha Gautama. He starts to realize that the kingdom looks like there's a lot of misery and despair in the kingdom. And he ultimately sees this fourth observation, which is a roaming ascetic, somebody who was trying to understand this sickness, aging, and death, and escape all of this and go on this journey to enlightenment. And he needs to ask his royal attendant, what's going on over there. And that's what his royal attendant explains to him, that this person's trying to figure out the sickness, aging, and death, and why this is occurring and how to escape out of that. And Siddhartha Gautama decides that's what he would like to actually do, is figure out how to do that. And he makes his way back to the royal palace, and he's decided that he's going to leave and go outside the palace and decide to go on this journey to enlightenment. And he didn't understand the mind as well as he did by the time he got to enlightenment, but he understood it enough that he felt like if he woke up his wife and his young child, that he wouldn't be able to leave. So he doesn't wake them up, he just kind of looks in on them and then kind of leaves in the middle of the night, taking with him his favorite horse and his royal attendant. And now when he leaves with this favorite horse and this royal attendant, he ultimately gets to a point where he starts shedding these things and kind of letting this go. And he lets his royal attendant go, he lets his horse go, tells the attendant, you've been a great attendant, and he ends up cutting off his hair. During this time frame, if you were a member of the royal family, you would grow your hair very long. And this was a sign that you were a member of the royal family. And when you went out into the kingdom, people would know that you're a member of the royal family. Where nowadays, in a kingdom, we might put pictures around of the king and the queen and the other members of the royal family, and everybody would know who the royal family is because we have this technology of photographs. But 2,500 years ago, in this area of the world where the Buddha was, he was born in what we refer to as Nepal, and they didn't have this technology 2,500 years ago. So they would just grow their hair very, very long, because it's only the royal family that had the time and the ability to sit around and have people comb their hair, shampoo their hair, detangle their hair, and take care of it. Because us commoners who were working in the fields and doing labor jobs, we wouldn't have time to be able to take care of this long, flowing, beautiful hair. So by him cutting off his hair, it's like, I'm never going back. And ultimately, we understand that this accomplishes other things for you too, in terms of the universal truth of non-self and eliminating personal existence view. But ultimately, he's cutting off his hair, understanding that, hey, I'm never going back, because nobody would ever believe that he was a member of the royal family or that he was the king assuming the throne, because he doesn't have this long, beautiful, flowing hair that he was growing for 29 years. So now he goes off on this journey to try to figure out how to get to enlightenment. And he initially takes up training with two individual teachers. The first teacher he studies with for about a year, and this teacher is claiming that they understand what it takes to get to enlightenment, and they're teaching their students to do things that disparage the human body, like hang themselves upside down from trees, lay on beds of nails, pierce the body with metal implements, starve the body, eat very little food. And the thought was that if you could cause physical pain to the body and the mind could overcome that you would be able to get to enlightenment. So the Siddhartha Gautama does this for an entire year and gets to the point where this teacher declares him a master of his teachings and says, hey, you can share my teachings. You've now mastered what I have to teach you. But he understood that his mind wasn't any more peaceful or joyful than it was when he was in the palace. So he decides to go to another teacher. And now this other teacher is essentially teaching him the exact same things. And within a year, he ends up mastering this person's teachings. And this person says, hey, you're a master of my teachings. So now Siddhartha Gautama, realizing that he hasn't gotten to enlightenment and frustrated with this whole thing, he decides to go off on his own into the forest. And when he's out there, he only knows how to do the things that he was taught. So he continues to disparage the body, taking it all the way to an extreme of where he was only eating 1 grain of rice per day. And when he was in the forest doing this, he was getting to a point where he was about to die, that his facial bones were protruding, the muscles on his bones had deteriorated. He was essentially skin and bones, and he was in meditation. And there was this mother and a young daughter that walk by, and they see that he's in this condition, and they fear that he's about to die, so they offer him some rice, and they beg and plead with him to eat this rice. And slowly but surely, he decides to eat this rice. He's essentially reluctant to accept it, but ultimately he does accept it and he starts to eat it. And he realizes in this moment that if he allows the physical body to die, he wouldn't be able to train the mind. So he starts to understand this middle way that he ultimately comes up with. That when he was in the royal palace, he was living this life of luxury with all these sensual pleasures and these desires that he had. He was able to fulfill all of those with the royal riches. But then when he left, he swung all the way to the other side where he was disparaging the body, all the way to the point of eating 1 grain of rice per day. And now he starts to eat in moderation, where he starts eating 1 meal a day, and he starts to discover this middle way, that there's this middle way that he can progress forward in life, pursuing things gradually. So this is what he ends up doing over the next 4 years. So a total of 6 years, he ends up getting to enlightenment, where he knows his mind is peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. And this is a mental state where you don't experience any anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, loneliness, boredom, shyness, resentment, jealousy. All of this is eliminated from the mind. And you'll notice focus, concentration, clarity, and deep memory. Your personal and professional relationships will really blossom because you're no longer being bitter and harsh and hostile in your relationships. And you're not even in a bad mood anymore because the mind has removed all the causes and conditions that lead to the mind experiencing discontentedness. And this is a permanent mental state that one attains during this life. So he knows by the age of 35 that he has attained this mental state. But he knew his teachings that he had to share were vastly different than anything that anybody else was sharing at this time, because they were doing these things like hanging themselves upside down from trees and starving the body and all these other things. So he goes to this particular tree, which is in modern day India, and he kind of hangs out there for about 7 weeks. And as he's there, he's contemplating of whether or not he should actually share his teachings because they're so different than everyone else's. And he was contemplating whether he should go back to the royal palace or whether he should go share his teachings. Well, after 7 weeks, we know what he actually ultimately decided to do, which is he decided to share his teachings. So what he does is he ends up going back to the area where he was originally studying with those 2 teachers, and he encounters 4 of his previous classmates and 1 of his previous teachers, these 5 individuals. And when they see him coming, they see that he has meat on his bones. He looks very bright and vibrant, and they start laughing at him and joking him and mocking him. But by this time, when the mind is enlightened, when somebody's doing that kind of thing, it doesn't affect your mind whatsoever. So Siddhartha Gautama wasn't affected by any of this. And he comes over to where they're at and he sits down on the ground and he takes his hand and he touches the ground and he performs the one and only miracle that I know that he performed, which is he caused these animals to where he's at, where there's these deer and these rabbits, birds, snakes, lizards, things like this that are coming to where he's at. And these 5 people see what he's done and they're like, okay, you've got our attention. And they sit down, and the Siddhartha Gotama, the Buddha at this point, is sharing his first teaching, which is called the Four Noble Truths. This is where you learn about the problem in the mind, the cause of that problem, the elimination of it, and the path forward. And that's something that I've taught in this program multiple times, where you're gradually learning through those 4 statements that can be independently verified that it's your mind causing the discontent feelings, that the mind is having craving, desire, attachment, it's craving permanence. So he starts to share his teachings, and now these first 5 people being able to independently verify his teachings, they're able to know that yes, he indeed figured out what was the problem, the cause, the elimination, and the path forward. And slowly but surely from this point forward, his teaching career continues to blossom, and more and more students come to learn with him. And now slowly but surely, more and more people start getting to enlightenment over the course of his life. Ultimately, he ends up dying at the age of 80. And by that time, they decided to preserve his teachings, where everything he taught was oral. But after he died, about 3 to 6 months afterwards, they start documenting his teachings and writing down his teachings. And these are the 3 criteria of what make a Buddha, is that they get to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. They dedicate the rest of their life to sharing their independently discovered teachings, and countless people get to enlightenment during that person's lifetime. And they preserve their teachings in such a way that countless more people get to enlightenment after their death. So we know that Siddhartha Gautama was an actual Buddha, and during his lifetime there were some people that knew that he was a Buddha as well, but it wasn't until after he died that all 3 criteria, and there's other criteria too, but those are the 3 primary ones, but it wasn't until after he died that all of these came together, and there was more and more people that could see that yes, absolutely, he was actually a Buddha. And he ultimately discovers why the mind is experiencing discontentedness or frustration or agitation during sickness, aging, and death. That if the mind is craving permanent health, when the body is experiencing sickness, then the mind will experience frustration or agitation or some other painful feeling. Or if the mind is craving permanent youthfulness, when the body's aging, then it's going to experience this discontentedness in the mind. And then if you're craving permanent life, then when you're getting close to death, you'll be sorrowful and sad because your mind is holding on and craving permanence. And the same thing can occur when you have people around you. Maybe your parents are sick or aging or experiencing death, or your brothers or sisters or grandparents. If your mind's craving permanence, when these things are happening, which is impermanence, then your mind will struggle and have difficulties. Because with the unenlightened mind craving permanence, but yet it lives in an impermanent world. If you look around you, everything is impermanent. So therefore, with your mind craving permanence during this time of major impermanence, which is sickness, aging, and death, the mind will have big struggles during that period of time. And then also any other impermanence that your mind is experiencing, where the mind is craving permanence, you're going to experience this discontentedness coming into the mind. So ultimately, the Buddha discovers what is causing this discontentedness, and he also figures out why this cycle continues to go on and on and on and on. That because of birth, we continue to experience sickness, aging, and death, and then there's discontentedness as part of that life. So if the being isn't born, then they won't experience sickness, aging, and death, and there won't be any discontentedness. So the same causes and conditions that are leading to the discontentedness, which is craving, desire, attachment, that longing, yearning in the mind, that craving for permanence, that's what's causing the discontentedness, and that's also what's causing rebirth. That's the fuel that causes one to continue to come into the world over and over and over again. The way that you can think about this is that if you had logs on a fire, these logs are the fuel. And as long as there's fuel on the fire, this fire is going to be sending off sparks into the sky. And now that spark is carried by the wind and it lands, and now it ignites a new fire. But if there was no fuel on the fire, there would be no spark, so therefore there would be no new fire. So the same thing is true, that if you have craving, desire, attachment in your mind, not only is it producing discontentedness, but it's producing this new consciousness or this new mind. One of the ways to think about it is if you have a cardboard box, and this cardboard box is a certain size, color, shape, and texture, and there's contents in this box like cravings and residual memories. At the end of this life of the box, where the box deteriorates, then those contents have to find a new box. So the box is representative of the mind, and the cravings, desires, attachments, the residual memories are the contents. So now when that box deteriorates, because the mind is impermanent, now these cravings are going to spark a new existence, because it's going to spark a new consciousness or a new mind, and now it's got to land in this new box, and now this other box is the new life or the new existence. So this is what one is experiencing. But when you eliminate the causes and conditions that are producing discontentedness, you eliminate this continuous cycle. And there's more details to be able to independently verify the cycle of rebirth that you can learn as you progress forward in your journey, if you'd like to end up doing that. So this is usually what I share about the life story of the Buddha, but there's more details if you guys would like to go deeper into it and understand more about it. You can ask questions by putting those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any and all questions that you like, and I'll be pleased to help you if you have any questions whatsoever. Because understanding the life story of the Buddha and what motivated him on this journey and what he experienced is helpful. But you shouldn't think that you have to emulate his life. You don't need to leave and go on this journey where you're in the woods and the forest and hanging yourself upside down from trees and causing pain to the body and things like this. And this is why it's helpful for you to hear this kind of story, because if you're ever in a situation where somebody's teaching you, say, a meditation practice, and you experience pain, and they're teaching you that, just breathe through the pain, and, that's normal, and just breathe through the pain, and just allow the mind to accept the pain and invite the pain in and observe the pain. You can see that the Buddha already understood that that doesn't lead to enlightenment. So it would be unwise to do those kinds of things, because it's not going to lead to your enlightenment. That pain is there for a reason, because it's the body signaling to the mind, hey, there's something wrong with your hip, or there's something wrong with your knee. You need to take some action here. You need to make some wise decisions and fix this. And that's why that pain is there. So if you just sat through the pain and breathe through the pain, can potentially be damage that's occurring to the body that can make it difficult for you to sustain your life and go forward in life. So if you guys have any questions about the life story of the Buddha, or sickness, aging, and death, or anything else that you guys would like to ask questions about, you're welcome to ask any and all questions. So I see there's some questions here coming in on Zoom. Looks like Chris is asking. He says, Teacher David, is it wise and beneficial to memorize the various feelings you list in your book, such as excitement, thrill, etc., to practice the 4 foundations of mindfulness? It almost seems like remembering, understanding, and being able to identify all of those feelings is required to practice the 4 foundations of mindfulness properly. It's important to understand what a discontent feeling is, which is conditioned feelings. That anytime there's some condition, the mind in the unenlightened state is going to form either a pleasant feeling, a painful feeling, or a feeling that is neither painful nor pleasant. Those examples that I give are just examples to help you understand, but there's a whole bunch more within each one of those 3 categories. So you would like to be able to know those examples, so that whenever any conditioned feeling is arising, you catch it as a bodily sensation. You would like to catch it long before it becomes a feeling, understanding that if your mind hasn't developed the full 4 foundations of mindfulness that it's not going to catch it as a bodily sensation. It's going to sometimes become a feeling, and sometimes it's going to affect the condition of your mind. But more and more, as you're training through the breathing mindfulness meditation and the generosity, you would like to catch it sooner and sooner to the point where you're catching it as a bodily sensation every single time. And if you can get to this point, this is where the mind can really be transformed. So whether you choose to memorize those or not is up to you. You don't have to memorize those, but you at least need to know what a pleasant feeling, painful feeling, and neither painful nor pleasant are in terms of conditioned feelings where the mind is basing its inner feelings on some condition. Chris has another one here, I think. It says, so he's quoting something from the Buddha. And there I was, Brahma or God, the great Brahma, the unvanquished victor and all-knowing, the all-powerful. And this is from volume 3, chapter 54, page 213. So Chris is asking a question here. Gotama Buddha seems to have explained in the above passage that he was born as the great Brahma, then later reborn as Saka, before being reborn as Siddhartha Gotama. How does this coincide and relate to the statement you made in a video about God not being reborn if he dies? Is there a way to reconcile the two statements, or was there a mistranslation or miswriting of the words of the Buddha? Thank you so much, teacher, for the time you spent helping me and other people. I benefit a great deal from your work. Okay, so in my opinion, by the way, you're welcome, Chris. Pleased to help you. In my opinion, what's being described there, even though it's not worded exactly like this, is how a Buddha can look out at the world as if they are God, but a God is not going to experience death and then being reborn. They have an extensively long lifespan where they have a lifespan that goes from the beginning of time all the way to the end of time, that they're not a being that is going to take on multiple existences. So somewhere along the line, I suspect that this got convoluted a bit, and now what's being described makes it sound like the Buddha is saying that he was reborn as God, where in reality, I suspect that what he's really communicating is that he can look out at the world as if he is God. And that's the way that I understand it. But honestly, and you're going to hear this occasionally from me in certain situations, these kinds of things really don't matter so much. What matters is that you understand the different realms in the cycle of rebirth and how beings move in and out of those realms. That's going to be helpful for you to understand. But whether this was the Buddha saying that, God exists and he was looking out at the world as God, or whether he was saying that he was God, it really doesn't matter, because that teaching by itself, or even connected with other teachings, isn't going to do anything to lead to the elimination of discontentedness, because you need to be able to train on the Eightfold Path. This is information that the Buddha is sharing and helping people to understand the various beings in the cycle of rebirth, but it's not crucial for someone to understand that in order to eliminate discontentedness. So while I share what I share, now I share this, that, whether what is actually in the Pali Canon is 100% accurate, or whether what I'm sharing is accurate, it doesn't actually really matter, because the important thing is to eliminate the pollutions out of the mind, to be able to train the mind to be able to get to enlightenment. And this particular teaching doesn't accomplish that. But I know that based what we see in the Pali Canon, we know that there's some things that aren't 100% accurate, because 2,500 years of history, it would be impossible to keep any document in pristine condition that exactly reflects what an individual taught 2,500 years ago, because of impermanence. So when you see things like this, a teacher that understands enlightenment and how to get to enlightenment can sometimes understand and share with you, this is something that you don't need to be able to clarify in order to be able to get to enlightenment, whether you look at it in the way that the Buddha taught it, in terms of what I think he actually taught, or whether you look at it in the way that it was documented in the Pali Canon. It's not going to change your ability to get to enlightenment, where you're eliminating discontentedness. Okay, I'm going to check to see if we have any questions coming in on Facebook or YouTube. Oh, it looks like Helena has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, David. So I've been thinking during the lifetime of the Buddha, people were searching for enlightenment, including his teachers. And if they knew about enlightenment, then it must mean probably that some people got to enlightenment before Buddha taught them how, just like, yeah.
Yeah, that's a potential. We don't have any documentation of that or any proof of that, but that's definitely a potential because getting to enlightenment is a human phenomenon. It's something that any human being is capable of doing. But in terms of getting there on your own and being able to share the teachings like the Buddha did and preserve the teachings, that's very rare for an individual to do that. As we were talking about at the temple today, there is something called a Pakya Buddha, but that individual doesn't teach. They just get to enlightenment on their own. So there's the potential that there could have been enlightened beings somewhere in the world. The Buddha does describe that this path that he's describing and this path that he taught was discovered by him and declared by him, and it was undiscovered or declared prior to him. So he does talk about that, but whether somebody figured it out in some other way, we don't have any documentation to know that to be true. So I don't say that it did exist or didn't exist. I know that the Buddha was enlightened for sure because the teachings that we do have, even though they're not in 100% pristine condition and we don't have every single thing that he ever taught, the teachings that are still around, these will lead to your enlightenment. If you have the guidance of a teacher to be able to help you, we know that he was a Buddha and that he indeed got to enlightenment. But what might have happened prior to him, we don't have any documentation of that.
Okay, thank you. And I think that I heard you saying that Gautama Buddha was actually thinking about whether to teach or not.
Yeah, this is something that he contemplated at that tree for 7 weeks. Sometimes people think that he sat under this tree and he meditated, and that's what got him to enlightenment, is meditating at this tree. But it's actually not true. That's not what is described in the Pali Canon, that he got to enlightenment and then he came to this tree and contemplated whether or not he should share his teachings or not. And then at one point, before he was getting ready to die, one of his students asked him, now that you're getting ready to die, because he informed people that he was going to die 3 months before his death, he said, now that you're getting ready to die, what should we do when people come to talk to you and show their respect and gratitude to you? And he said, well, there's these 4 places that you can visit, and they can go visit those places, and it can arise dedication in their mind. And that places are the place where I was born, the place where I attained enlightenment, which is considered to be this tree, but in reality, he attained enlightenment over the 6-year period. And we could even say that he attained enlightenment over multiple lifetimes. He said you could, visit the location where I delivered my first discourse, first teaching, and you can visit the place where I die. And these are the 4 sites that he suggested that someone could visit in order to arise dedication in their mind on the path to enlightenment.
Okay, but why was he even thinking about whether to teach or not? Like, what was the other option? Just coming back to the royal palace and...
I think that the other option would be to go back to the royal palace, right? Because he could assume that life and live this life of luxury. By the time an individual gets to enlightenment, he needed to figure out what was he going to do with the rest of this life now that he had figured out what it took to be able to get to enlightenment. And facing the world as being the lone individual who understands these teachings and nobody else understands them, this is like a real daunting task to be able to face the world in that way. Even today, there's lots of people out there that are teaching what they consider to be the path to enlightenment, or they may even think that they are enlightened. So even a Buddha arising today, facing an entire world of people who don't understand what it takes to get to enlightenment, this takes deep contemplation, because an enlightened being isn't just going to haphazardly walk into any particular decision or any particular thing that they're going to do. They're going to think it through and figure out what would be wisest in this situation. So it wasn't just an automatic that he was going to go teach. He needed to think it through, figure out if he was going to teach, and if so, how was he going to do that and how was he going to accomplish that, so his decisions could be well thought out, and then he could gradually make his way towards where we are today 2,500 years later, and countless people understand of his existence, and there's people who look at studying his teachings, and was all put into motion through him spending those 7 weeks to figure out what should I do, and if I'm going to do the teaching, how should I do that? And that way his decisions could be well thought out and be successful and produce wholesome karma.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm going to see if we have any other questions here. It looks like Chris might be asking some more questions. Okay, so Chris is asking, I think I understand that imagining one's own death can help a person realize non-self. What about imagining hurtful things that people have said or could say? Does that reduce one's proponents to irritation, or would it increase it? So reflecting on death helps you to eliminate your craving, desire, attachment, where you're craving existence, and this will help you eliminate your fear of death. And then if you contemplate death for people around you, it'll help you eliminate your attachment to them as well. And this will help your mind to become more peaceful and more at ease. So I haven't ever taught that reflecting on death would help you to realize non-self, but getting to enlightenment, you're going to have realized non-self. And I haven't really taught that the contemplation of death is going to help you to do that. There's other techniques that we use to be able to accomplish that. And then you ask about, what about imagining hurtful things that people have said or could say? This could actually potentially be helpful for you to realize non-self, because when there's the mind clinging to the self-image or the self-identity, the mind's wanting to be perceived by others in a certain way. So if you imagine these things and recollect these things, it can put the mind in the situation that it doesn't want to be in, but you just need to be diligent to cut off any arising of discontentedness when that's occurring, and be sure that the mind's prepared for that, because otherwise your mind could end up in the feelings of experiencing any kind of discontent feelings as related to that. So if you're going to do something like that, in my opinion, yes, it could be helpful, but be sure that you have all the other things that you need on board, like the Eightfold Path, the meditation training, and things like that, so that if you're going to do that, your mind is prepared and ready to be able to let go of any personal existence view. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So what I'll do is just thank all of you guys for joining for today's class. Thank you for joining. Thank you for being interested in learning the teachings of the Buddha. And at the same time, I'll invite you to our future class, because next week we have chapter 20 coming up, which is going to be all about helping you to understand the evolution of your consciousness from the animal realm to the human realm. Now that you're starting to understand the cycle of rebirth just a little bit, we kind of touch on it just a little bit today. Next class, this is where we're going to get into it in more detail. I'm going to describe the 5 realms, and I'm going to explain to you how a being moves through these various realms and what the experience is like in these various realms. So that's going to be next Sunday. This Wednesday, of course, I'm going to be doing loving kindness meditation with students and opening up to any and all questions that you have. And then we have the Pali Canon and English study group on Saturdays. Next week on Monday, not tomorrow, but next week, I'm going to be starting a Foundation in the Path to Enlightenment course here in Chiang Mai, which is going to be live streamed as well. So you're welcome to attend that if you haven't learned that, or you can watch the recordings if you like. So anytime you guys have questions, feel free to reach out and get help. I'm here to help all of you guys. You can ask questions in these classes. You can post in the Facebook group. You can send a private message, or you can schedule personal guidance through our website. There's a little interface there that'll help you to be able to get scheduled for an appointment. So perhaps I'll see you guys in one of these future classes. Be well and have a lovely rest of your day. Take care. Sawadee.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.